Good evening, parents, carers, teaching staff, old foresters, and youth advisory board members. I'm really excited to be joining all of you this evening for our second webinar in our Forest Focus series. And of course, this evening we're going to be focusing on supporting effective revision, specifically targeting Year 11 and Year 13 pupils and students in the run-up to their mock exams. This presentation will be recorded and a link will also be sent out in due course with all of the resources and presentations that have been used. Please also be kind enough to complete our feedback survey. We're not expecting any technical difficulties this evening, but please do bear with us if we do encounter any problems. And without further ado, I'd like to start tonight by obviously introducing myself, but also just pointing out some of the individuals that will also be involved in the proceedings this evening. So I'm joined tonight by Mrs. Mel Wright, Director of Academic Progress and Head of Learning Support at Forest. I'm also happily joined by Ms. Rona Mackey, Deputy Head of the Middle School, with a particular focus for academics, and by Mr. James Stevenson, who is our Deputy Head of the Sixth Form, again with a particular focus on academics. So hopefully well represented across the school. And in terms of the schedule for this evening, the kinds of things underpinning tonight's session are as follows. I'm going to speak about the learning process, the science of cognition, and more importantly, the science of forgetting, because by understanding the underpinning ideas of cognitive psychology, we can all understand our brains better, and we can leverage higher leverage, I suppose, higher effective strategies for learning and hopefully ameliorating that forgetting as well. We're also going to hear tonight from some outstanding Year 12 students that have been through the process, have got really, really strong sets of GCSE results. And I've asked them to reflect on their GCSE journey, how they navigated it, and the kinds of strategies they used in their learning. We're then going to hear from Miss Mackey, who's going to talk about blurting as a revision technique, followed by Mrs. Wright, who's going to talk about dual coding, which is one of the learning strategies that we really endorse here at Forest. And finally, we'll hear from Mr. James Stevenson on knowledge organisers and flashcards in supporting effective revision. And then we'll return back to me, where I will give you some practical strategies for talking to your learner, to your child, about their learning and the kinds of environment that you might want to think about setting up at home to really support that revision. So without further ado, I'd like to kind of point towards one of my esteemed colleagues in the world of cognitive psychology, and that is Professor Dan Willingham, based at the University of Virginia. And before he was there, he was at the University of Harvard. And he has devised this model, which I present to you today, which he calls his simple model of cognition, his simple model of learning. In this model, we have the environment on the left, as you can see, and that obviously includes all of the things that we as humans see, hear, feel, and so on. What we attend to or we give our attention to in any given moment, what we selectively concentrate upon, and that is moved through our attention into our working memory on the right-hand side of the model. So from our environment into our working memory, and that can be through sight, through sound, or even through feel or emotion. Working memory holds all of those things that we are thinking about. It's almost like our random access memory. It's the thing that goes straight in. It includes our reflections at this moment, right now, thoughts about maybe what happened an hour ago, those dark clouds on the horizon that many of us might be feeling, and so on. And of course, people may also be aware of things that are not currently in the environment. So, for example, I can fondly recall right now a delicious cheese slice that I ate for lunch. That is very much in my working memory right now as I present to you, thankfully. Um, Below working memory, or kind of around it, we have learning and remembering, which we will return to later. And basically above that, we have our long-term memory, which was described by Clark, another cognitive psychologist, as our big mental warehouse in which we maintain our knowledge of the world. Importantly, long-term memory resides outside of your awareness until it is called upon. And then those thoughts enter your working memory and so become conscious. So we're always in this dance between working memory, long-term memory. Our working memory is always looking to retrieve things from our long-term memory. Thinking occurs when we combine information from the environment and from long-term memory in new ways. That combination happens in working memory as either learning, or we call it in the business encoding, or remembering, which also could be retrieving or relearning, or for the purposes of this session, revising. The review reminds us of the key principle that working memory can be overloaded. Many of the strategies derived from cognitive science focus on the crucial interactions between working memory and long-term memory. And in fact, a lot of what we're going to be talking about tonight is how we can boost our working memory, how we can actually develop working memory to work for us in the example when we are retrieving things from our long-term memory. What strategies can we actually use to develop that? And I just want to take a moment to prove this before I go any further. I want to give our parent carer audience 15 seconds to try to memorize all of these letters. Don't write them down, just have a look, 15 seconds, memorize all of them. Your time started about 2 seconds ago. Okay, I'm really kind, so I'm going to show you this again. The average human would have memorized about 7 to 8 of those letters. An above average score might be about 70% of the letters, and 0.1% of you, brain boxes clearly, will have memorized all 15 of these letters. But actually, humans are really, really bad at this, at memorizing based on kind of unconnected, random letters, characters, thoughts, ideas, facts, statistics. We can do things though to make this process much more straightforward. So, for example, if I was to do this, does that help you remember those letters more efficaciously? So, all of those letters actually were acronyms for television stations or television stations names. So, by leveraging two scientifically proven effective revision strategies which have their roots in cognitive science, I've improved the cognitive process for the learner. So what I've effectively done there is I've used two strategies. One of them is chunking at the encoding stage, turning these random sequences of letters into something that you can connect to your broader schema, something that you're aware of, i.e. television stations, which is much more easy to remember than just random letters. But what I've also done here is I've provided you with some dual coding. I've provided a illustrative picture underneath those letters that actually has some kind of relational meaning to those letters, i.e. somebody pointing a remote at television. But there are so many other things you can do to make that learning process more straightforward. That's just one quite silly example. I just want to turn now very quickly to another cognitive psychologist that I've been reading a lot of recently. And this is Frances Jensen, who is based at Harvard. And she authored a phenomenal book, The Teenage Brain, which I really recommend to everybody. And this is a neuroscientist survival guide to raising adolescents and young adults. And she concludes after 3 decades of research the following. One of the reasons that repetition is so important lies in your brain development. One of the frontal lobe's executive functions includes something called prospective memory, which is the ability to hold in your mind the intention to perform a certain action at a future time. For instance, remembering to return a phone call when you get home from work. Well, research actually tells us that this prospective memory isn't developed at age 16. It isn't fully there until actually late in our 20s, and it undergoes stages of development physiologically, usually between 6 and 10, and then it pauses. And then our brain develops that kind of prefrontal cortex once again in our mid to late 20s. So between the ages of 10 and 14, studies reveal no significant improvement here. It's as if that part of the brain, the the ability to remember to do something is simply not keeping up with the rest of a teenager's growth and development. And to me, that just gives us the very essence of this challenge. What can we be doing to ensure that revision is as effective, as streamlined as possible, but also takes into account these things that we know about the brain, that we know about working memory and long-term memory, and the physiological development of people at certain points in their life. Um, I've just titled this next slide, "Is your learner aware of the deficiencies of working memory?" Do they actually know this? Do you know this? Um, I've alluded to this already, but actually many studies have shown us that the number of individual items, whether that's a fact in history, a quote in English, an algebraic function in mathematics, a schematic or diagram of a cell in biology, we can store about 7 things in our mind at once. But actually, more recent cognitive psychological research has actually revealed that that number 7 was actually quite optimistic. Most humans can probably remember about 4 to 5 things at any one given time in their working memory. That's how much they can store. And actually, they can only remember that on average from between 18 to 30 seconds. So if you haven't taken a conscious effort to retrieve that, try to remember it, and then write it down and relearn it, then that will probably go away very quickly. And this is backed up by lots and lots of research within cognitive science. So this, I just point to this very quickly to try and illustrate what it is I'm talking about. This is how our memory works. This is the process that we go through whenever we learn anything, whether that is, like I say, basic history, whether that is actually scientific equations, or whatever. We have the input, the stimuli, that could be the original lesson, but that's always conflicted with sensory things. What posters were on the wall at the time? What did the classroom smell like? All of these things are competing for space in our working memory alongside the inputs. And we need to be really aware of that, and that's why revision is so important. We inevitably end up, therefore, forgetting. Inevitably, we never remember things on first go, at that first encoding stage. So really, it's only through constant rehearsal, through retrieval and encoding, that we are able to actually more powerfully connect our working memory to our long-term memory. So all very theoretical for now, but I hope that some of the strategies that I'm going to speak to and my colleagues will speak to will actually show you what this could look like in reality, what pupils could be doing to develop these connections between their long-term and their working memory. I just want to kind of show you one other thing here, based in cognitive research. And this is Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve. And I actually think this is a really empowering model, even though it looks quite horrible to kind of reflect on as humans. So in 1885, the German psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus tested his memory over various periods of time. Once he'd gathered all of the data from space learning studies that he'd conducted, he was trying to remember vocabulary in a test. He plotted it on a graph that looked a little something like this. And the graph basically illustrates that when you first learn something, the information disappears at an exponential rate. Almost from immediately to 20 minutes, we can retrieve about 58% of that original input. And don't forget, like I've said, many things are competing with that in your working memory to begin with that are external to the learning. So that information disappears really quickly. And by 31 days, by the end of the month, you can probably retrieve about 21% of that initial stimulus. So whether that's 21% of a lesson, 21% of even activity. He measured that without regular revisiting of the content we want to learn, if that doesn't take place, we forget what we've learned very quickly, which might sound really obvious, but the picture here presents a really catastrophic view of actually what might happen if you leave your revision right until the very end. If this process of encoding and retrieval isn't something you're engaging with all the time, really from now. If only 21% of the material from each topic that I was teaching was retained by my students without revisiting it, but their performance in individual lessons was good, I might actually think that things are going all right. But actually, when those pupils go away from the lessons, it's then when they start to forget. So we need to empower our learners both in the classroom, but most importantly, outside of the classroom, to kind of end this forgetting curve, or at least to ameliorate it. David Ditto, another kind of educational theorist, writes something which I think sums this up quite nicely. What we need to accept is that forgetting is endemic and predictable. Everyone, doesn't matter how cognitively gifted you think you may be, forgets at broadly similar rates over time. But we can slow that pace of forgetting. We can do that. I just want to show you one of the things from Daniel Willingham. I really like this quote. If a genie comes out of a lamp and offers you one way to improve your mind, you should ask for more working memory capacity, because that is pretty fixed. But what isn't fixed is your opportunities to retrieve and encode from long-term. That is something you can consciously do. So Ebbinghaus discovered, as part of his research, that not only do we forget things very quickly, but actually, if we review new information at key points, we can reduce the rate at which we typically forget. As such, every time you reinforce your training through revision, concerted good revision, the rate of decline actually reduces. And he also talks about this idea of the testing effect, that simply by going through the motions of testing your memory, quizzing yourself on the stuff that you've been taught, let's say, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, that in itself will help your memory become stronger. As the biggest drop happens hours after you learn new information, within, let's say, 2 hours, 3 hours, maybe between period 3 and home time, it's always a good idea to go back to the thing that you've been taught straight away. That's what we mean by consolidation. Going back over the lesson you have just been taught in school. That's something actually that pupils could be doing on a daily, nightly, or bi-nightly basis to really facilitate their remembering of content, to try and ameliorate this forgetting curve. In Mindhacker, another great book on kind of cognitive tricks and tips to try and get out of this forgetting cycle. Ron and Martin Hale Evans say the following: our memory is simultaneously magnificent and pathetic. It is capable of incredible feats, yet it never works quite like we wish it would. Ideally, we would like to remember everything instantly, but we're not computers. We can, however, hack our memory with tools like memory palaces, but such techniques are really actually very difficult to do. You might have seen Sherlock Holmes, and very famously, we read Sherlock Holmes, and very famously creates this memory palace where he can go into his long-term memory and retrieve things very well. Most of us can't do that very well. However, they say there is a compromise, a learning technique called spaced repetition, which effectively and efficiently organizes information for memorization and retention, and that can help us to achieve near perfect recall. We'll be hearing a little bit more about that later. We, from really day one in year 7, explore with all of our learners these hacks, these tricks, the things that they can be leveraging to ameliorate their forgetting, the things that they can do at home, and we can do as teachers in lessons to actually ensure that they are remembering things, that they are revising effectively. But those things are illustrated here. Some things work better than others. Space practice, retrieval practice, interleaving are 3 such concepts that we teach very actively to pupils at Forest. But it's obviously with their revision at home that they need to be using these things. And we're going to speak more about how they can be leveraged at home in a sec. And actually, with that in mind, I'd like to hand over now to our really brilliant year 12s who have used some of these practices at home and actually did go on to achieve very top GCSE results at the end of last year. So I'm going to hand over now to our year
12. Hi, I'm Lily Rose and I'm in year 12.
Hi, I'm Roman from year 12.
Hi, I'm Isla, I'm in year 12.
So the advice I would have given to my year 11 self in the run-up to the January mocks is that it's important that you've seen the content before you start revising it in the Christmas break. So what I did was start revising some of the content in half term and the weeks after half term, and that was a useful method, and it's called spaced repetition. So it meant that I could beat the forgetting curve more, and I had a stronger foundation for what I was learning. So the forgetting curve, I don't know quite how long it is, but what happens when you learn new information, what happens is after a period of time, you forget it and it won't be in your long-term memory anymore. If you, before the time comes when you forget that, you revisit it and learn it again, it doesn't have to be that long. It will go back into your memory, and you have to do that maybe 2 or 3 times before it goes into your long-term memory. And by the time you get to GCSEs, if you've done that for all the content you need, it'll be so much more helpful. You won't have to cram out anything.
Well, I'd say the main piece of advice I'd give if I was in year 11 now, I was going up to my mock exams, I'd say do at least stress yourself out a little bit, because it stops you procrastinating as much as you might like to. Whereas don't stress yourself to the point where you find the work is intolerable.
My main advice would be to take mock seriously. Once you've taken mock seriously and been over all of that content already once for mocks, it will be so much easier for your summer exams. So you're basically going over everything twice, and then there's just a little bit extra that you've learned. So if you take mock seriously, it will be so much easier for you.
It's very important that you are fully prepared for the mocks and that you have revised properly, because it will be extremely helpful when you come to your GCSEs a couple months later. Again, with the forgetting curve, you'll have gone through the information just that extra time and confidently. And that's important because when you're doing your GCSEs, you can't sustain high intensity revision every day over a 6-week period. So having learnt the information before will really help.
I think spaced practice was really, really useful, and that could be if you've gone over a topic, then when you come to revise it next, do some past paper questions for that topic at the next slot, so you're not doing them immediately after, and that's a really good way to know if you've retained the knowledge. So
exam readiness strategies that I used, which I found successful, again, spaced repetition to beat the forgetting curve. And what I did to learn information and facts quickly and efficiently and making sure that they went into my long-term memory was active recall and the blurting method. So what that entails is if I had a topic, let's say it was theme CRS, I would get a big piece of paper and write down everything I knew. And then I would get the specification out with me and the whatever I needed to revise. I'd read that with the specification, and then I would rewrite what I needed to know. And I'd do that maybe once or twice until I knew all the information. I did that for a lot of subjects, and I found it the most time efficient way and a way that it would be in my long-term memory.
I'd say the main thing I did when revising was just over and over again mock exam papers, because they're so readily available. You get at least 12 per subject, or some if you go back previous years you get more and more, and examiners run out of questions to ask, so they are repeated.
Another tool is past papers. I would definitely recommend using a lot of past papers, and it depends on the subject and you as the individual. But for me, for certain subjects like maths, physics, chemistry, I used past papers. I did so many, and that was what helped me the most for them subjects, but it depends. And another tool I used was creating a mistake log. So for those 3 subjects, I had like a list of 50 plus mistakes I'd made in exams, and once I'd written them down, I rarely made them again, so that was a useful tool.
Past papers are also really, really useful. I would say they're probably the most useful. If you've done many past papers for every subject, then not much can faze you in the exam. It's a really good way of testing your knowledge and practicing exactly what you'll be doing in the exam.
For balancing your revision with mindful breaks, what I would say is create a distinct study space from where you relax. Don't revise on your bed, and make sure that you maintain a good sleep schedule so that you can have a clean slate for the next day, and also so that you're remembering information that you have revised. And if you are feeling like you're not revising successfully and you've been revising too long, just take a break, and don't revise for 4 hours straight, because it's not going to be successful.
I would say something that's really useful is to plan when you're going to not be studying. So make a plan of when you're going to see your friends or go and do something fun, so you've got something to look forward to, and it's not just like never ending in your mind.
I didn't set a timer for myself, but you could if it helps you. But what I did is I spend as long as I could tell that I was focused on the subject. It was usually an hour or so, then I'd take 10, 20-minute break, start an hour again, 20-minute break, start an hour again. Usually for just 2-3 hours a day. And that's, I think, the most that you can honestly say that you're spending your full attention on.
It's what everyone says, but you should definitely make a timetable. So once you've made a timetable, look at how many slots you've put for each subject. Then you can look at all the topics you need to revise for that subject and allot them to a slot. Leave a few slots spare, so at the end, if there's anything you still don't understand, you can go and do that again at the end.
Thank you very much, and best of luck with your exams.
Thanks very much for listening, and best of luck with your exams. Hope it goes well.
Thanks for listening. Good luck in your January exams.
Hello, so for those of you who haven't met me, my name is Rona Mackey and I'm the Deputy Head of Middle School Academic, as well as Head of Religious Studies and Philosophy. So RS is a subject which has a huge amount of content that students have to learn. So I'd like to talk to you about a strategy that I recommend for students across every year group called blurting, or it's also known as a brain dump or memory mind map. I would recommend that students use this strategy towards the start of a revision process and then at intervals after that. So what is blurting? To put it simply, blurting involves students blurting out everything that they can remember on a topic. It therefore acts as a method of retrieval practice, as they're trying to dig deep down into their memories so that they can pull out what they've learnt. So step one is for students to identify a topic that they want to focus on. To do this, they should look at their revision checklist and complete a RAG rating. Red for topics that they feel least confident on and that they couldn't answer a question on in the exam. Amber for topics that they have some knowledge of but would need to work on in order to get full marks. And green for topics that they feel confident on and that if they did the exam now, they could get full marks on that question. Using their RAG rating, they should then pick a topic. It may be that they want to start with something a bit easier to build up their confidence and a bit of momentum, in which case they should pick a green topic. Or they may want to start with something that they find hard, whilst they're feeling most fresh and to get it out of the way. The red topics are then the ones that students should focus most of their time on. If it's a topic which is quite tricky or which contains a lot of content, they may also want to identify subheadings to act as prompts. Once they've picked a topic, they should then set a timer for around 5 minutes, depending on the size of the topic, but I wouldn't suggest spending much longer than this. They should then start the timer and write down everything that they can think of. It doesn't have to be neat or in full sentences, just words or bullet points are fine. It's up to them how they want to lay it out. Within the 5 minutes, they should try to include as much detail as possible. And even if they get to 3 minutes and can't think of anything else, I'd encourage them to keep thinking until the timer is up, because they may well manage to access the depths of their minds if they give themselves a little bit more time. Once the 5 minutes are up, they should then compare what they have written to their notes. Taking a different coloured pen, they should write in corrections and any points that they have forgotten. They may then want to update their RAG rating. For example, they may have put a certain topic as green, but then when it came to actually having to write things down, they didn't know as much as they thought they did. Or conversely, they may have listed a topic as read, but once they really thought about it and got started, they knew more than they thought. This isn't the end of the process though. They should then repeat this strategy a few days later for the same topic. Then a few days later, repeat it again. And after perhaps a third time, I would suggest that they get out each of their blurts on a particular topic and look at the coloured pen. Are they forgetting the same thing every time? Draw attention to that point so that they don't forget it again. Or are they getting something wrong each time? Do they need to look over it again or ask their teacher for help? Hopefully there'll be less coloured pen each time as well, which is a useful visual way of monitoring progress. So why do blurting? Blurting helps to identify gaps in students' knowledge so they can organise their revision accordingly. As mentioned at the start, it's also a good method of retrieval, as students are having to remember as much as possible on a particular topic. Every time they bring a piece of information to the front of their minds, they're making the memory stronger and more secure. Similarly, by repeating the process every few days or each week, they're utilising spaced practice and regularly reviewing content so that it doesn't disappear into the depths of their memories. By writing down as much as possible, this method also encourages elaboration by spending the 5 minutes including as much detail as they can, as opposed to flashcards which might lead to quite brief answers. It's also a fairly quick method, which can make it seem more manageable. If students only have 10 to 15 minutes, they can use that time productively through blurting. Similarly, it can be quite a nice way to start a period of revision before perhaps completing revision questions. It's also motivational because over time, the colour pen will reduce and they'll be able to see the progress that they have made. This strategy may also be particularly helpful for students who think they know nothing about a topic and for whom completing practice questions would seem like a waste of time. It's an easy starting point and they'll probably know more than they think once they really challenge themselves and write something. And even if it's wrong, it doesn't matter because that actually means they've gained some really useful knowledge about what they need to focus on. It also applies a bit of pressure with the 5 minutes, which means students are practicing having to focus and complete a task within an allotted time. Finally, this method requires thinking. Students have to work hard to retrieve as much information as possible, as opposed to just blindly reading through their notes or looking at a flashcard. And as Daniel Willingham says, memory is the residue of thought. It's when we think about something that we remember it. However, there are some potential pitfalls which can reduce the effectiveness of this strategy. Firstly, not setting a timer, because this may mean that students spend too long trying to recall things, or they may get distracted without the time pressure. Similarly, students shouldn't spend too long trying to make their notes look nice. They don't need a fancy title or lots of different colour pens. That isn't a good use of their time. They just need to write everything down and not worry about how it looks. And students must check through their notes afterwards. Otherwise, they could end up learning the wrong things or not realising that they are forgetting something important. Finally, this shouldn't be the only method that students use. The aim of blurting is to help students to learn and remember content. Once they've done this, they then need to be applying this to exam-style questions through deliberate practice. So how can you help as parents? You may want to time your child completing their blurts, thus reducing the need for them to have a phone nearby. Or, if they want to be challenged, you could pick a topic for them. Finally, you could adapt the strategy and ask your child to tell you all about a topic in 1 minute. This works well for students who like to speak things out loud, but it has the drawback of their points not being checked. Thank you for listening, and I'm now going to hand you over to Mrs. Wright, who is going to talk to you about dual coding.
Hello and good evening. My name is Mrs. Wright. I'm Director of Academic Progress and Head of Learning Support. So I'm going to talk to you in the next few minutes about dual coding. Mr. Key has already made reference to it, but I wanted to explain it in a bit more detail. So dual coding is basically using the verbal and visual processing in your brain to try and make sure that you understand exactly what it is that you are trying to learn. Dual coding is a process of combining your verbal materials with your visual materials. And this is done through drawings, diagrams, graphic organisers, And the idea is that the more senses you use when you're learning something, the more likely you are to remember it. The revision strategy for dual coding is simply to think about triggers that help you to recall information. So that might be pictures or words or codes, whatever that is, and you're using all of those things to try and embed the information into your brain. So I'm going to talk through a few examples of how you can dual code effectively. The first is to use timelines and comic strips. And these are very helpful for English or history, where they lend themselves really nicely to a pictorial representation of what you are trying to learn. And that can be like a timeline or a sequence of events or an order of things. And it's a creative way as well that's kinesthetic, that allows the child to actually think about what they're learning and how that might look in a pictorial form. The second slide is a second way we can do this is through, gone too fast. The second way to do it is through annotating your notes. So you might have a set of notes, and what you're trying to do, I'll put codes and symbols around key parts of your information. And this again is to help to trigger some of the facts that you are learning. So if you don't remember the words, then you might remember the symbols that go with it, which will help to trigger the information and the knowledge. The third way, and this is very helpful for things like science and geography, is to do labeling, to draw yourself whatever it is, whether it's a heart or a picture, a diagram, and label it. And then to try and reproduce that numerous times by remembering the labels and what goes with each part. You can use colours and all sorts of visual aids that actually make this a very pictorial form of your information. So once you've learnt it or produced it in a visual representation, you need to embed that into your long-term memory. And that is when you engage your verbal processing side. And this is really where parents and carers can help. What you can do is ask your child to explain to you their visual representation of their notes. So explain the diagram or the different codes that they've put around it, and to present that to you. Pupils might want to imagine giving a presentation to an audience so that they can actually say these things out loud and actually hear it back to themselves. They might record a voice note which actually explains their diagram that they have made, and they can listen to this on the way to school so that they're remembering that piece of information. And they might also want to make a little video that actually shows them explaining those notes and sharing those perhaps with a buddy or a work partner that they can swap ideas with. So the pitfalls of dual coding is that you spend too long actually making it look pretty and looking too nice, and it's not really about the drawings. You don't have to be an artist to be able to dual code. It's about what logically fits in your brain, and one representation for one person won't be the same for somebody else. So it's actually about what works and what fits for that person's brain. The second pitfall is that you don't talk it out loud. So if you don't engage the verbal side of it and listening side of it, then you're only really using half of the brain. So once you've done that diagram, it's really important that that is expressed and said aloud so that you remember it. So that in essence is dual coding. I'm going to hand over to Mr. Stevenson now, who's going to talk about organisers and flashcards.
Good evening, everyone. I do hope you're all well, and it's going to be my pleasure to talk to you for about under 5 minutes about knowledge organisers and flashcards. I'm going to be touching on some things that have already been discussed this evening, many ideas about cognitive science and effective revision, but actually that's a really good thing, because as we know, that's got a name. It's known as retrieval practice, and it helps to strengthen memory, and it helps to build really dynamic knowledge bases, which we can use in exams and assessments. So knowledge organisers and flashcards, I like to think of them as a dynamic duo. They can exist separately, they can be employed separately, but they're really well employed together. And these two strategies, when employed together, relate to 3 of the 6 learning scientists' high impact study skills. They relate to retrieval practice, which, as I've already just said, and we know, is about bringing past information to mind, deliberately revisiting things. They relate to dual coding, which, as we've just had explained to us, is the combination of written information with visual information. That utilizes two channels of the brain and puts them together to build a powerful memory. And then we've also got spaced practice, which we've already discussed this evening as well. The idea that you go back and revisit things, and that will slow down the process of forgetting and help us again to build durable memories. So when we say, and do apologize for the formatting issue here, but when we say knowledge organizer, what do we really mean? Well, we mean a document, often in the form of a table, that breaks down a large topic from a course specification into a series of facts with accompanying descriptions. The best knowledge organizers tend to largely be text-based. I've got no issue with imagery. I'm head of art at Forest as well as being deputy head of sixth form, but the best knowledge organizers often omit imagery. This example knowledge organizer is one from, I'm assuming, a history course. I must say I've got it from the internet, and it's on the topic of apartheid. And you can see we've got a range of facts, we've got a range of accompanying descriptions. So how can we make an effective knowledge organizer? Again, apologies for the formatting issues of the slide that's come up on the screen. First of all, you should choose your topic area, and it should be a topic area you know not very much about. You should then break this into a list of key facts. Most topic areas can be expressed into sort of tables, 2 to 3 sides of A4. So they can be broken down, and it's quite an accessible and light document. For each fact, you should write a concise and accurate explanation. Quite often, textbook revision guides have this information in, but the knowledge organizer format is a far better way of presenting that information, and it can be used really effectively for retrieval and revision. And that leads us on to flashcards, because I'm going to discuss how a knowledge organizer, how a document that breaks down all of the key knowledge that you need for a particular topic with accompanying descriptions can be used to make flashcards. So what do we mean when we say flashcards? Well, perhaps unsurprisingly, we're referring to something that's in card form. It has specific information, again, related to a topic from a specification. And again, that information is best presented when it's a fact with an accompanying specific and accurate description. One other thing that you can do with a flashcard is, with the fact, pair with an image. And we had a really brilliant description from Miss Wright just previously there, but that's because, again, we're working on two channels of the brain. We're working with the visual channel, and we're working with the written channel, and we're pairing them together. It's going to build that durable memory. So how can you make a really effective flashcard? Well, you should go into your knowledge organizer, and you should choose a fact from that knowledge organizer. Write that on the front of the flashcard. If you wanted to, and I would recommend that you do, add an image linked to the fact. And on the reverse side of the flashcard, you should add your accurate and concise description. Here's an example. I've taken it from the previous knowledge organizer on apartheid, and I've got my key fact or keyword, segregation. I've got an image of segregation, and I've got my description. It's concise and it is accurate. Once you've made these flashcards, you should test yourself by working through all of them on the chosen topic. What you can do then is, for each fact, give a perfect explanation. And by the way, at home as well, this is a great opportunity for parents to support, because you could be the person holding up the cards and letting the student know if they've got them correct or not. But it's also something students can do themselves. They can say it aloud, and then they can flip it over and see if they got it right. If you got a card right, I'd recommend putting it in one pile. Could be on the right or the left of yourself. And if you got cards wrong, I'd recommend putting them in another pile. Those cards that you get wrong should be revisited more frequently than the ones you got right. Of course, we know that we should be slowly going through all information again and again to try and reduce the sort of amount of forgetting we've got going on. But cards that you got wrong the first time, I'd recommend revisiting a couple of days later, or if not, the next day. And again, we've got here the forgetting curve. We've had some discussion on that already this evening. But again, the idea that we want to go back using these flashcards, using the knowledge organizers too, and testing yourself regularly. And it's quite a quick activity to do. It's also something that can be done in short periods of time. So you don't need to have carved out a significant chunk of revision time. It could be something that's exercised within a short break, for example. So why do this? Why do these things? Well, as noted earlier, knowledge organisers and flashcards are really effective revision practices. They can be used across all years. This is sixth form and GCSE, and they help us to build robust memory and recall important information with ease. And this ability is absolutely crucial. You know, as we had earlier, Miss Willingham says that if your working memory is expanded, that's one of the best gifts you can have in terms of improving your mind. And these are certainly strategies that can help you to do that. So that's it from me. I believe I'm passing over to Mr. Key now, but I'd just like to say thank you very much for listening, and I do hope that's been helpful.
Thank you very much to Mr. Stevenson, Miss Mackey, and to Mrs. Wright, and of course to our Year 12s as well, for talking about how we can actually put these things into practice. So just to recap, blurting, we heard from Miss Mackey, as a tangible and practical way of retrieving, engaging in space practice, leveraging the testing effect, and elaborating. And obviously that elaboration at that point is brilliant, because obviously we know from studies that actually if we can teach content, we end up actually retaining that content at a far greater level than actually at the point in which we're just receiving it. Studies actually suggest if you can teach something to someone else or elaborate something to someone else, actually we retain about 80% of that information. So that's baked into that strategy. Dual coding as a way of thinking about how to maximize the encoding stage and efficiently move things from working to long-term memory. And in the same way, we've got knowledge organizers and flashcards. What everybody needs to understand, and this is why this model's back up on the board, all that our young people, our learners will be doing in that example is fishing things out of their long-term memory into their working memory. That's all that they're doing in that example. They're fishing things out of that long-term memory into their working memory. We know we have a finite and limited working memory. There's nothing we can do to improve that. But what we can do is we can develop those connections between long-term and working memory. And that enables that retrieval to happen faster, to happen more effectively, and to happen with more accuracy in that example. And all of those strategies give scientifically proven, validated opportunities for pupils to do that practically at home. A few other things tangential to all of that I just want to quickly talk about are environmental studies that have suggested that there are things we can do, very simple tweaks we can make to our learners' learning environments that actually helps the encoding stage, the stage at which we move things from working memory to long-term memory. And one of those things is lighting. In a big research study actually championed by the University of Leeds, Samani in 2012 actually suggested that lighting makes a huge difference to the speed in which that encoding stage happens, the speed in which we move things from working memory to long-term memory. So actually the key things to draw out of this were that actually learners working in brightly lit rooms with access to natural light tended to remember things much more quickly than those working in more dim or kind of, let's say, mood-based lighting settings. So always ensure that there is a bright, but I would say indirect light in the room. And ideally, that light is natural as well, as far as we can maintain and establish that. Very hard to do, I appreciate, during these winter months. Ventilation also makes a huge, huge impact. Rosbach-Vondt et al., another big university-driven study in 2013, suggested that learners that had good circulation of fresh air could again retain things far more effectively than those that were in environments where air and CO2 had circulated for a long time. So ensure that the room in which your learner is working in has an openable window. Very simple thing that you can do to just ensure that they've got the prime space for their learning, for that encoding stage to happen in that retrieval stage. Failing this, consider an air purifier or oscillating fan to move air around the room. And that just brings me to this point. Working at a desk, even sitting up straight on a chair, will always yield better results on those, at that level than, say, lying prostrate in a bed. It's really, really important that actually even that setting is correct. So just practical things that you can do. to ensure that they have the right learning environment. What I kind of want to end with are the kinds of questions that you as parents and carers can ask your son, daughter learner to support that effective revision. So rather than just asking them, how much work have you done today? Or are you doing this? Or whatever, actually questions like this could be far more impactful and really get them to reflect on these learning strategies that we've been hearing so much about today. Do you have access to or know where to find a range of examples? Something our Year 12s talked about was access to past papers, but actually in addition to that, what do good responses look like? And indeed, what the poor responses look like? Does your son, daughter learner have access to those materials? Do they know what a 9 looks like? Do they know what a 5 looks like? Do they know what an A star distinguishes, the distinguishing features of an A star versus that of a C or a D? And if they don't, then their teachers are the first port of call. That's a learning strategy that we call concrete examples, which we've not really covered today, but are a very key learning strategy in the same way that retrieval practice, space practice, interleaving, dual coding, all of these things that we've looked at, just as important to support that process. You might also ask which topics from the specification list you feel strongest on. And indeed, the process that Mrs. Mackey engaged in blurting, that was the starting point to actually analyze the specification, RAG rate where they are. Now, do they know where that specification list is? Can they find it? Do they know what the constituent parts of that are? That's a very simple question that you can ask to ensure that their focus is correct. And a follow-up then might be, are you revising the bits that you feel strongest on less frequently than those you feel weakest on? And if the answer to that is, yeah, I'm spending more time on those areas, then invert that, flip it. They should be looking at the areas that they're weakest on. That's really important, but not to forget those strong things to forge that better memory. A really good question that you can ask is, teach me X. Teach me the causes of the First World War, or explain to me Pythagoras theory, because that engages them in elaboration. And as I've said, a learning strategy which suggests that actually the act of teaching, elaborating, even verbally talking through your learning is much more likely to lead to better encoding, better retrieval, and much better memory. How long have you spent on Y topic today? It might feel comfortable now, or you might feel pressured to continue, but you really should move on to Z topic and then revisit Y topic later. All the studies tell us that spending too long on one topic is actually will have a mal effect. It will actually have the reverse intended effect on retrieval and long-term memory and on the capacity to actually encode. Pupils should be mixing their topics up as much as possible. A learning strategy that we call interleaving, moving things on when they're starting to feel a little bit more confident and comfortable. In terms of revision timetables, for me, these are an absolute no-go. I'm yet to find a good traditional revision timetable. They're really popular amongst pupils, but I would absolutely push back on that. They are, for me, a waste of time. They're not effective. They simply provide an opportunity to procrastinate, an opportunity to make something which looks very nice that might take hours of a child's time to actually devise, but that's hours that they could be spending on these really impactful learning strategies. However, not all revision timetables are made equal, and I would really point you in the direction of the retrospective revision timetable, which looks a little bit like this. It's a bit similar to what Miss Mackey was talking about with blurting, but effectively, rather than saying in advance, I'm going to study these topics on these dates, you organize the specification by RAG rating areas that you feel weakest and strongest on, and then you prospectively and retrospectively after that, plan when you should next revisit those topics. And obviously, you revisit the topics that you're weakest on more frequently than those you feel strongest on. A really good explanation of that can be found on YouTube. And I really, really do recommend sitting down with your son, daughter learner and going and accessing some of these study YouTubers. Some of them are absolutely brilliant. And I wouldn't recommend spending hours on this because obviously they need to be revising and actually using and leveraging these strategies. But what some of these study YouTubers are very good at is making it very clear very obvious and very practical what these strategies look like. So Ali Abdaal is somebody that I would really point everybody towards, and I've put links in here, but you can simply find his channel on YouTube if you type in Ali Abdaal. How I finished first in my medical cohort at Cambridge. He's somebody who obviously is looking back as an older learner, but actually using all of the strategies that we've spoken about today. And actually those strategies are just as applicable to university and postgraduate study as they are to GCSE and A-level study. So that's really important. He also talks about the retrospective revision timetable and really breaks that down as a learning strategy. So I would really point you in that direction. And finally, other study YouTubers that are worth their salt and that I would definitely recommend are the learning scientists. And we've actually been using their diagrams all the way across today's session. They are cognitive psychologists in their own rights, based in America, talking about the evidence and what that looks like practically in terms of revision strategies. And they break down each of these concepts, whether that's dual coding, interleaving, the spaced effect or the testing effect, retrieval practice, elaboration. They talk about all of them and they show pupils what they look like in practice in different subjects. So I really recommend their channel. It's absolutely fantastic. That's me done for today. I hope that was somewhat illuminating. I hope it gave you some food for thought in terms of the cognitive process, but also some practical strategies for how to engage your son, daughter, learner in their revision. Some of the really big takeaways there are they using effective revision strategies, or are they just going through the motions, so to speak? We're really happy to support those conversations. Please feel free to engage us in those conversations from home. But I really would recommend you to maybe use some of these as a base when you next talk to your son, daughter, learner about their revision. Thank you ever so much for your time. Just to end, obviously, we really appreciate you tuning in. We will be circulating these resources. I also thank my colleagues for their incredible expertise and insights. A reminder, please do complete the survey. We're really, really interested in your feedback, whether you appreciate these kinds of webinars, whether this is the right approach. We want to hear from you. And please also do join us for our next webinar on Monday, the 16th of January, where we will be exploring online safety and youth-produced sexual imagery. More details can be found on the parent portal, and the link will be sent out to parents and carers in due course when we return after the Christmas holidays. The very best of luck to your son, daughter, learner, and I hope that you feel empowered to have these really high leverage conversations with them. Thank you for your time.